who does not have that risk. So especially if there is a fire that is happening, and what do we need to do? We need to escape it and get out of the building if that's where it is, or away from the fire. If there is a mobility risk factor, then that can be more difficult. And that makes someone more susceptible to a burn injury. The next is understanding. So it might take a while for someone to process something like a burn injury is happening, especially a scald injury. Next is sight. So it's very difficult if someone is unable to see that something is hot, or if if a fire is about to start. And lastly, medication. So medication, there are some medications that have a side effects of drowsiness. And if that happens, or if something like that happens, then it makes it more difficult to escape from a fire or a burn prevention or a burn injury. So there are some dangerous attitudes about fires. So we often see fires that happen, and then some dangerous attitudes that we say. The most common phrase is, "It won't happen to me." There are fires that begin from smoking, and another attitude is, "I've been smoking all my life, why should I stop now?" And next is, "My dog would wake me up if there was a fire." I know my dog is a little bit on the lazy side. That's not always the case. Your dog might not be the best protective factor, although it might be a protective factor for you. There are other protective factors that you have to consider. And lastly, we have the best fire station in town. They would save me. And firefighters are wonderful, and they are an asset to our communities, but we also have to take the time to prevent injuries on fire and burn on our own side. So if we can't change attitudes, maybe we can at least develop some protection against common fire and burn hazards. So let's begin by looking at their leading causes of fire and burn, death, and injury to older adults. So throughout this presentation, we're going to go over huge causes for the fire and burn, death, and injury. So the leading causes are smoking, cooking, scald injuries, electrical wiring, and heating. So a very common one that we see coming through our burn center is our smoking hazards. So the average age of cigarette fire death is about 55 years and older. This typically results in discarding cigarettes that are still lit into beds or chairs or trash cans. It also, the risk factor increases with alcohol or prescription drugs. Like I said, those can both cause drowsiness, and if you're smoking, something that we have seen is someone who falls asleep as they are smoking, and then that causes the cigarette or cigar to then fall out of their hands and onto the floor, which can cause a fire. So that's something that happens as well. And also the visitors and caretakers and neighbors are also at risk. So when this happens, of course, especially if you live in an apartment building where it's everyone lives in close quarters, and that is more likely to cause a building to catch on fire, which puts everyone at risk. So we highly, highly, highly encourage, if you do smoke, then to smoke outside, just because there are so many risk factors that come with that. So next is smoking and oxygen therapy. Another thing that we typically see that is related to smoking burns is smoking while on oxygen. So we definitely do not recommend smoking when you depend on a portable oxygen tank. Smokers who depend on oxygen should leave smoking materials at home when you're out in public, especially. So what this does is when you are smoking, and this can cause this can cause the oxygen to essentially explode. And now I'll pass it off to Liz.
So keeping safe in the kitchen is also going to be a big prevention, especially when preventing fires, injuries, that type of thing. So several types of injuries can result from accidents in the kitchen. A grease pan or grease in a pan, or your sleeve catching under the burner can catch fire, cause a burn injury from there. You could spill a hot food on yourself, suffer a scald injury. You could pick up a hot dish, and that would be a contact injury. And then finally, burns can also be accompanied by bone fractures. If you were to spill something on the floor, you could slip, you could fall and fracture a bone or hurt yourself, bruise, that type of thing as well. So here are some tips to prevent an injury while you're cooking. So being sure to wear short sleeves, close fitting clothes, something that won't get in the way when you're cooking to ignite. Wearing a heavy cloth apron over your clothes to keep those clothes close to your body will be important. And then using the correct pot holders if you're placing pans down on the counter, oven mitts when you're getting things out. And things to even think about too, to keep nearby, and we'll talk about it in another slide, but the correct lid for all the pans too is going to be important to keep by you. So that really leads us into our cooking area and how to keep our cooking area safe. So keeping flammable, so the cloth, any paper, keeping that away from the burners, and that kind of goes along with the loose fitting clothing as well. When children are present, really creating this kid-free zone, which will be about 3 feet around your cooking area. And when other adults are around you, helping them keep the kids away from you as well is going to be important. And then also using the rear burners when you're cooking. That kind of decreases the risk of a child reaching up, grabbing a pan or a handle, or even you knocking it walking by. And then we really want to make sure our countertops are not cluttered. So really keeping the countertops, and this goes along with that space around us that we're cooking. All of appliances, crock pots, air fryers, deep fryers, they usually come with appliance directions. So being sure to check those, read those instructions before using. They're there for a reason. And then keeping crock pots, deep fryers away from the edge. So that kind of goes along with that, using the back burner. Try to move these away from the edge. This way, again, a kid can't reach up and grab it. You might not be able to knock it. Even getting anything caught on the appliance cords can pull that down, and you could suffer an injury from that. So making sure that the longer appliance cords are coiled, or now we're starting to see more manufacturers actually manufacture a smaller and shorter cord for this type of safety. And then trying to avoid the use of extension cords, especially in the kitchen. I know sometimes extension cords are just inevitable needing to use, but keeping it away from the kitchen, that just creates another hazard for that. And so the safest practice of all is really to not leave your cooking alone. It's not always the most realistic thing, but when using a pan, if you're going to fry, grill, boil, or broil, you want to stay by that pan. If you're baking, you're roasting, staying in the house is important. You might not be able to stay in the kitchen the entire time, but setting timers so that you can continuously check the cooking progress. And then in case of a grease fire, having that matching pan lid close by is going to be important. You would take the pan lid, if the grease ignites, taking the lid, having a mitt on while you're doing this, so keeping everything close by, and putting on the pan lid from front to back to smother those flames and to smother that fire. And you're not going to want to touch that pan until the pan is completely cool. So shutting off that burner. There are fire extinguishers. We have combo fire extinguishers in the house. Recommended not to use them really for grease fires, only because that can splatter the grease and actually cause more of an injury and create more of a fire hazard in the house. And then in case of an oven fire, making sure that you're going to shut it off, close the door, and again, leaving the oven alone until it's cooled down. And again, these types of, you can always call the fire department if even a small little fire breaks out. Calling 911 is not is recommended actually to help with safety as well. And then we have a microwave oven. So microwave ovens should be located on a countertop. That's not always the case. We see a lot of them mounted over the stove. That's not the most recommended place for these. But for the microwaves that are mounted over the stove, making sure that your burners are not on, that you're not kind of simultaneously cooking on the stove top as well as the microwave oven. That leaning over that, your shirt could ignite. You could scald yourself on a hot pan. So really trying to deter away from that, making sure they're not mounted and trying to keep on the countertop when feasible. You also want to make sure you're using microwavable safe cookware. That's going to be those Pyrex dishes, that they're very safe in the microwave. Styrofoam is not recommended in the microwave, and metal is not recommended in the microwave at all for risk of fire. You always want to allow the food, beverages to cool before opening. That can create a steam burn, especially if you're peeling back like a plastic covering on one of the trays that you've been microwaving. That can cause a burn from the steam actually, not so much the contact of it. And then making sure that you're mixing the contents before serving, just because we have hot spots in microwaves and the food there can have hot spots. So mixing that food before you're serving it to your guests. And then back to when I talked about how spilling something can create a fire hazard. You can get a scald burn. So making sure that your floor is clear. We don't like throw rugs really in the way of your kitchen. You could trip while holding something. So using non-slip if you're going to use anything on the floor. If you do spill something, get into the frame of mind that you're going to wipe that up immediately so that you don't forget about it and step on it and slip when you're walking by. And then another thing too is if you're going to be serving, making sure that that path is clear. If you're going to be walking to the kitchen table with a hot meal, making sure that path is clear so that you don't have any fall risks to trip, anything like that.
All right, so something that is important for preventing scald burn injuries is to learn how to measure hot water temperature. So we recommend for the safety of everyone in the household, especially when it includes infants and older adults with thinner skin, testing the temperature of the undiluted hot water as produced by your heater. So how you do that is you run hot water until it feels hot, which typically takes about a minute or two, and then utilizing a cooking thermometer to test the temperature and determining if it is too hot for you. So what is a safe hot water temperature? So if the initial test temperature is above 120 degrees Fahrenheit, definitely lower the heater thermostat setting if you can. If you live in an apartment building, ask if this is a possibility. If the initial result is below 120 degrees Fahrenheit, it may actually be at the lower end of the range. And we also recommend retesting about 1 to 2 days until the water temperature remains at or below 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So that temperature is pretty much the sweet spot that we're looking for. So when it comes to establishing the hot water temperature, keep in mind that 120 degrees Fahrenheit is the maximum level. It's not necessarily the target. Most dishwashers have an internal booster heater, and modern laundry detergents perform effectively at water temperature levels well below that maximum. So 110 degrees for older adults specifically is recommended just because of that thinner skin. So the comfortable temperature, especially for senior bathing, is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you do draw a bath or draw a shower, make sure it's around that temperature and not more than that, just because of the thinner skin. And also the lower setting means you're paying less for the heating of your hot water. So here are some tap water scald prevention devices. So we call this direct scald prevention because the water directly causes injury. So one is a tempering valve, and it actually must be installed by a plumber on the water line. So this can prevent scald prevention, or this can prevent scald burn injuries. Next is the anti-scald shower head, such as the one in this photo, and it can be installed by a consumer on a shower head or faucet. So both of those prevent the water from reaching that scary temperature of 120 degrees or higher, and keeps it to where you want it to be. So we also want to talk about indirect injury, so fall prevention. So this essentially means that something like a potential scald burn injury might cause a separate injury and not directly affected by it. So there might be something by proxy that happens. So we also want to talk about the importance of installing grab bars within the shower in case you slip and fall, and what our natural reaction is whenever we feel something that is too hot against our body. What do? We want to get away from it. So installing something like grab bars, and also a shower chair just gives us more stability if things get too hot and we want to get away from it. And lastly, non-slip floor mats are very important to install within our bath if we have them. So the non-slip floor mat, an example is pictured here on the left, and there is a shower chair on the right. So next we'll look at electricity and what dangers relate to electricity used by older adults.
So electricity is pretty important to our day-to-day living here. We use it for everything. We really can't imagine a world without it, especially in this day and age now. So these are just a few of the danger signs that can develop over some time. So things that we want to look out for. So any cracked or frayed appliances, extension cords, trying to decrease the use of extension cord is going to be important. Any cords that you notice that get hot to touch when you're removing a cord from the wall or plugging something in, if that feels hot to touch, that's going to be a danger sign. If you notice any loose or broken appliances, any cords or plugs that are loose, especially when you feel like they're plugged in and they feel pretty loose in there. Any warm switch plates or those outlet covers, that's also going to be a big danger sign. And then any frequent tripped or blown circuits, blown fuses, if that continues to happen, it's going to be really important to get an electrician in to really kind of take a look at that. And it might be a really good time for that person to go through and just kind of look at everything else around the house, to just making sure that those danger signs aren't there. And so it's also really important not to overload these outlets or extension cords. Everybody has extension cords. Everybody has these multiple outlets. You don't want to fill all of those holes. I know that they're there. They make you feel like you can fill them and it'll be safe, but it really isn't that safe to have those all overloaded. So using and then making sure you're unplugging, that's going to kind of be a key thing to really prevent some of this. And then when feeling those danger signs in the slide before, having that electrician coming out and inspect, they might need to rewire some things. They can look for those loose appliance plugs, those frayed or cracked cords, overloaded circuits, that type of thing. They'll be able to look and really help with that. And then really having periodic home inspections. If you're living in a building, making sure that maintenance is on board with that. A friendly reminder, just, hey, I'd love to have somebody come out, take a look at some things. It's their job. Landlords are responsible for this. So really just staying on top of that will help them as well. And then it's really important to keep your sleeping area safe. I know especially in this type of weather, there's a lot of electric blankets, electric heating pads. So periodically checking these things for any charred spots, any cracks in those wiring, making sure to use a heating pad for only 15-20 minutes at a time. Most of the heating pads that are sold now have that auto off feature. If they don't have an auto off feature, maybe setting a timer for yourself to make sure to shut this off, because we shouldn't be keeping that on our skin for any longer than 20 minutes at a time. And then not to lay any heavy equipment. You don't want your pets laying on these things. You don't want yourself laying on these, just because the heaviness of that can actually create a scald burn, something that you might not even feel because you're already desensitized from the heat from the heating pad. So that can really lead to an injury as well. And then really just to make sure the area is still safe and making sure that you have a clear route for exit out of your room. I mean, there are shoes everywhere, throw rugs, picking those types of things up, just being mindful of that when you're going to sleep, because not only will that help you if you need to get out of the room in case of a fire, it also creates a clear path for any rescuers who are coming in case of a fire to rescue you. And then making sure to have some things next to your bed, personal items that are available for quick access. So your eyeglasses, hearing aids, a telephone, a flashlight's important. And then making sure a working fire alarm is either in the room or directly outside of the room. And making sure that if it is outside of the room, that you should be sleeping with your bedroom door open. By law, we're supposed to have fire alarms either in your bedroom or outside of every single room in your house apartment. But if it's outside, making sure that door is open. And then sleeping on the first floor, if possible. I know it's not always possible, especially in apartment buildings, that type of thing. But that kind of leads you right back to making sure you have a clear route of entry and exit.
All right, so next we're going to move on to candle safety. So this is extremely important when it comes to burn and fire prevention. So make sure that you use heavy, sturdy, heat-resistant candle holders big enough to collect wax. And make sure that candles are kept away from window coverings and other flammable items, and also children. So you can see in this picture here that the candle is around a lot of materials on a shelf, and make sure that the candle is more standalone and that there isn't anything surrounding it. And keep wick cut to about 1/4 of an inch. Those longer wicks, they have the potential to catch something in the that's next to it if it is not standing alone, and potentially cause a fire. So make sure it's about 1/4 of an inch and no longer than that. And lastly, please make sure that you extinguish the candle before leaving a room or going to sleep. That is a huge red flag for fires. And lastly, if the candle is a structure like this and it goes inward instead of straight, make sure that after a while you stop using that candle if it reaches a certain point, and make sure to buy the candles that go straight up rather than go inward like this. All right, and next is portable heater safety. So this is extremely important for especially New England. So portable heaters should be kept clean and at least 3 feet away from combustibles, including papers, definitely upholstered furniture, and piles of clothing. Kerosene heaters should not be filled indoors while they're still hot, and that is definitely a fire risk. And indoor spills can gradually saturate the spill area and create potential for ignition. So definitely make sure that anything that is spilled is cleaned up. This can happen if the area comes into a contact with a dropped cigarette, a spark from an electrical appliance, or the flame of a heater or furnace pilot light. So kerosene should definitely be stored in the blue cans that are designed and labeled specifically for the kerosene and nothing else. All right. And so household heating safety. So definitely keep flammables away from the house heater outside the residence. And also keep combustibles 3 feet away from the heat source. So going back to the previous slide. So make sure that there is plenty of space between a heating source and anything that could catch fire, especially with radiators in apartments that we see. We want to make sure that our furniture is at least 3 feet away, because that is a fire risk if it's so close to the radiator. We definitely do not recommend using aerosol cleaning products nearby a heating source as well. Those have the potential to cause a fire. And lastly, service home heating systems. Annually, we recommend that they be serviced annually. So keeping them clean will make them last longer and reduce the risk of any malfunctions that could then result in a fire. So next is, I'm just going to, sorry, this slide is a little jumbled, but many cleaning products in common household use are dangerous chemicals. So if a product can dissolve dirt, it can also dissolve skin. So always protect your hands and arms from chemical burns by using heavy rubber gloves. You can find these at a grocery store, at a drugstore, at a department store. So whenever you use strong cleaners, we highly recommend that. Always store solvents in their original containers and discard leftover supplies on an annual basis. We strongly do not recommend mixing them. So if you have just a little bit left of something and you pour it into a different bottle that has more of a different cleaning solution, we do not recommend that. We always recommend that they stay in their original containers until you run out of it. So this is because an explosive chemical reaction could occur. Make sure you keep cleaning products away from young children and use locked cabinets with high storage shelves if possible.
So now we're going to kind of talk about a little bit more prevention in the house. So installing and maintaining smoke alarms is important. They should be on every level of the home. It should be outside those sleeping areas or in bedrooms if you sleep with the door closed. It should be out right next to the kitchen. There are also modified alarms that you can use for hearing impaired. And then since the majority of these fires do take place in homes without working fire alarms, maintenance of these alarms are important. So we've all heard the chirping of that fire alarm. And the second you start to hear that chirping, it's important to really go and check that battery or have somebody come and help check that battery for you, whether that be maintenance, you can call an electrician, anybody like that, because that's a huge goal of community prevention when it comes to fire safety. There's also carbon monoxide detectors, and there's also a lot of fire alarms that are actually combo fire alarms as well as carbon monoxide. But these are also becoming more common just because the carbon monoxide, we see injuries and even deaths from this because it's such a silent killer. You really don't know it's there. It's odorless, it's tasteless. So really making sure that you have the prevention against that. And then also making sure that you're displaying your home address outside of your home. If you're in an apartment building, that's really not up to you. That's up to maintenance as well as the landlord. But in your own house, making sure that your address is, the number of your house is easily seen from the street. This is going to help save a few seconds when those firefighters, or if there's a fire in your home and you've called 911, really getting them there to help you and help get you out of the house if needed. And then also one more thing back to about the fire alarms, making sure you're testing those alarms. I think they recommend, it's usually on the instructions. So making sure that you test them. Usually it's every 3 to 6 months that you're going to want to go up, making sure they're chirping, that type of thing, making sure that alarm is going off and you can hear that alarm. So you're also going to want to properly prepare your own home in this type of, in case of a fire. So developing that escape plan. Growing up, I'm sure we were all told, like, make that map of your house. How are you going to get out? We teach our kids that. So even doing it for yourself is going to be important. Again, apartments, those usually they're displayed outside in the hallways, but making sure you know where your exits are. Practicing safe escape plan, as well as keeping those exits clear is going to be important. So that kind of goes along with the lines that we had talked about earlier with the bedrooms, keeping the entry and exits clear. And that can also help reduce some of the injuries with relation to fire. And then, so in case of a fire, above all else, you're going to want to stay calm. You're going to test that door of your apartment. If that door is closed, you can feel it. If it feels hot to touch, you're not going to want to open that door. That means the fire could be on the other side of that door. Staying low under smoke rises. So if you can stay lower, that's going to be where the oxygen is. That's going to be a little bit easier to breathe. Covering your mouth with a cloth. I know we are all in masks now, but even having a mask close by can help with that too, filtering out your air. If you're in a building, not to use that elevator, to remember that fire escape plan and use the closest stairwell to get down. Calling 911 from outside of the home if possible. You're going to want to get yourself out. If that's not possible, then definitely calling 911 when you're in the building. And if you are trapped in the building, signaling fire rescue workers is important. So making sure that you can crawl over to that window, open that window. You could take a towel, put it outside of the window. That kind of just clues in the rescuers that somebody's up there and they'll go for you first to get you out. And so this is really just kind of to summarize everything that Katherine and I have reviewed. So these are some key guidelines to remember. So smoking, we don't recommend smoking, but if you do smoke, don't smoke when you're drowsy. Don't smoke when you're in bed. Try to smoke when you're outside. When you're cooking, wearing the safest clothing. So those short sleeve clothing, having a heavy apron on, and then really just keeping that area clear. To prevent scald burns, so making sure you're setting that water heater thermostat to not exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And then keeping the flammable liquids outside of the household if possible. But if you are keeping it inside, making sure that that area is clear. And then as for electrical burns, replacing or repairing any damaged wires and making sure that you're periodically checking all that. And then this is just a little information on the burn center here at Brigham and Women's. So we do have burn surgeons on staff. We have burn physician assistants on staff. This number here is actually a number that you would use if you wouldn't be necessarily the one to use it. So we do recommend that if you have suffered a burn, to get medical attention. So whether going to the nearest urgent care, going to the hospital, it might not be Brigham and Women's, you can go to the nearest emergency room because that hospital will determine if you need to be transferred to a burn center. And that's going to be the number they call. I'm actually also going to put a number into the chat, and that's going to be our BWH Burn Clinic, and that number is 617-525-9327. And this is a clinic number to schedule any appointments, and that you can be seen with the burn surgeon, with our burn physician assistant. We do telemedicine calls, we do in-person visits. So using that number to schedule, you won't be able to get medical information over the phone, and that's why we recommend going to an urgent care, your primary care doctor, or the nearest emergency room. But this number is really helpful if you wanted to just get a second opinion, or even just you had a small scald injury, you didn't see medical attention, but you want to be seen by a burn surgeon or PA, give that number a call. We can get you scheduled, we can get you seen. And that's pretty much just our burn center in a little bit of a nutshell.
Wow, so much great information. Thank you so much, Katherine and Liz. If anybody has any questions, please type it up in the chat. In the meantime, while people are thinking about their questions, I do have some questions. I was thinking about us being at home during COVID, and do you find that there are more people coming in with burn injuries because of people cooking more at home or trying to cook more at home?
So I think scald injuries are our number one injury that we see, and we see it from cooking. We've seen it from the water temperature, like Katherine had talked about, of the showers, that type of thing. So that I feel like is the biggest area that we can help prevent burns. And not necessarily so much during when like quarantine and COVID. I think scald injuries happens no matter what. So that is always one of our biggest incidences of burns that we see.
Wow. That also, and what type of what age group do you find that to be more likely? Is it more the younger, like the 20s or the 30s, or does it pretty much run the gamut?
It really runs the gamut. It kind of goes throughout. We see a lot of scald injuries though from the older adult, just with how Katherine had said earlier, like the decreased sight, the decreased mobility, that really plays a role in a lot of the burns that we see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love the slide that says that said "Stand by your pan." It reminds me of this song. Stand by your pan. And it's actually something that I was reminded to do this summer when I was trying to make kombucha, and I was boiling water with some sugar, and I was in the other room doing some stuff, and I lost track of time. And before I knew it, I was smelling burnt sugar. Seconds later, I was running around my house, opening up doors and windows. It can happen so fast. So it's so important to really pay attention and stand by the whatever it is you're cooking.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think another one that comes to mind is baking. And when you are baking, you just think, oh, I'm going to put it in the oven and then I'm going to go do laundry and leave and go to the basement. And what happens then is you lose track of time and then you burn it, and then it can potentially cause a fire.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes along with crock pots too. We see so many people using crock pots, and you'll set it and cook for 6 hours, but you should be periodically going over and checking, making sure that wire is still plugged in the back there. It's not there out that you could grab it. So keeping track of that is really important as well.
Definitely. Anything that is old also, you were talking about crock pot, so you could have like a 40-year-old crock pot that somebody handed to you because they no longer use it. What are your suggestions when somebody gives you like old appliances that looks like it's seen many better days? What would you do?
I mean, the biggest thing is really to check those wires. So making sure that they're not cracked, that they're not hardened. You don't want an extremely hard wire that feels like it could just crack. And then even just making sure that some appliances now will see that they have the grounding plug that goes with it. So it's like the 3-pronged plug. Those are more safer than even just the 2-pronged ones.
Yeah.
So, I mean, continuously checking those older appliances to make sure that the wiring, that everything is still intact on the back where that wiring goes into the appliance is going to be really important. And if you can, buy new.
What would you suggest for those of us who may be cooking and, there's a pot, it was steaming, and we reach over and we have a little bit of a steam burn? Can you give us a little bit of a burn first aid on what we could do? Has there been any like new development on what we should be doing?
There really isn't much, and it hasn't changed. It's really kind of stayed the same throughout years. You're going to want to run it under cold water. That can really help stop that burning sensation. And then we mainly use the triple antibiotic ointment, those bacitracins. If blisters appear, that you're going to want to be seen by a medical professional, whether that's urgent care, whether that's an emergency room, or your primary care doctor. We really recommend, even if it's just a superficial burn, if it's bothering you, if it continues to bother you, we do recommend getting seen and seeking medical treatment for that.
Definitely. One of the things I learned about blisters from one of our wound nurses a while back is a blister. Think of a blister as a protective cover over that wound. Don't ever pop a blister, because that's the temptation. If you see something water and bubbly on your body and you just kind of keep playing with it, and squishing it
Mhm.
or maybe puncture it.
Mhm.
So
Right.
one of the biggest lessons I learned from her is if you can, try not to pop a blister because that is a protective coating over that wound. If anything, just kind of maybe put like a bacitracin and an ointment and a Band-Aid over it. So that way you're protecting it.
And definitely seeking medical attention with the blisters from burns.
Definitely, yes.
Because there'll be times that they might want to remove the blister to help with healing too, but that's going to be up to the medical professional, and we shouldn't be the ones deciding that for ourselves.
Exactly. Can you speak about more about carbon monoxide, that detector? Because we hear it from time to time, but I haven't really heard about it, prevention for it in a while. It seemed like there was a fad a while back, and then now I don't really hear so much about it.
I feel like a reason that we're not really seeing it is because most of the fire alarms are actually combos now. So alarms that are being installed in houses and apartments, they're actually the combination for fire and carbon monoxide. I mean, it's still definitely important. But I think because now they've really combined that, it's just kind of one alarm type of thing that we're seeing and hearing. So carbon monoxides are recommended if you have a fireplace in your home, making sure that you have one in that room. There's even ones that you can just plug right into an outlet and leave there. They also recommend having them around the kitchen and then definitely in the basements of homes, if there's basements.
Yes, definitely. Basement, we can't forget the basement. Definitely the basement's very important. How often are we supposed to change the battery? Is it when we turn the clocks back and forward?
I think it's every 6 months, and it usually will say it on the directions of the whichever one you buy. But normally, you're testing, you're checking every 6 months.
Now, as far as luckily we're going into the spring season now. Thank goodness! Yay! Can you speak about burns that you would kind of expect during the summertime?
I mean, firecrackers, fireworks are a big one, especially among kids and like the younger ages. Bonfires, we see a lot of. And then alcohol kind of associated injuries is a big one. People are getting outside, having a few drinks, that type of thing. So really, we recommend not having alcohol, substances, especially if you're going to be around bonfires, that type of thing.
Yeah. Oh, as far as the microwave, and I'm sure people are very familiar with proper heating habits of, when you put food into the microwave. Can you just kind of tell us, is there any recommendation on how many minutes we should reheat something so that way we're not burning the center of the food and we're not hurting ourselves?
I think that's really hard, just depending on what you're cooking. A lot of meals that are already prepared that you're going to be microwaving, they'll tell you how long to microwave that stuff for, but it's going to be really important to let it sit for at least a minute in the microwave before taking it out and then stirring it. So it varies from microwaves, it varies from the type of food you're heating up. Start low, and you can always add time on is a big one. So instead of putting something in for say 6 minutes, maybe doing it for like 2 minutes and keep checking it, stirring it, then putting it in for a little bit longer. But I really think it varies depending on the type of food or the type of microwave you have.
Yeah.
Right, and definitely stirring it, because what can happen is certain areas of the food are extremely hot while perhaps the center of it is going to be extremely cold. So you can burn yourself by eating the extremely hot parts of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So when I like what you recommended as far as when we're cooking to use the back burners. I like that a lot because I'm vertically challenged. I'm short.
Same.
So I cook using the front burners. I use the back when I have to, but I like to kind of be able to look in to see, how my food is, cooking. But I really like that suggestion. And also the handles, the pan handles, making sure that it's, we all have our own preferences on where we want the handles kind of like sticking, right? Depending on who you're cooking with, could be one direction or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's extremely important for the pan, but it's also extremely important for anything that is holding a hot liquid. I told this story recently at one of our burn prevention workshops, but I was reaching over a teapot that had boiling water in it. And I reached up to grab something, and then my elbow hit the handle, and the whole teapot that had just come off the stove poured all down my front, and I got I'm not sure what degree burn, but it was very painful. So make sure that anything you have that's in that's hot and in a container, make sure it is pushed back, because that can definitely cause this what's called injury as well.
That's
Coffee cup, anything that just came off the pot, make sure.
Yeah, very good point. Oh my gosh. I'm glad you're okay.
Yes, that was a few years ago. I survived. I'm good.
Can you, Liz, can you speak a little bit about the degrees of burn? Katherine talked about burn degrees. Can you remind me of the different degrees of burn, and just to kind of let us know in a simple way, so that way not that we'll self-diagnose, but at least we'll be able to recognize, oh, this one is this. This is what Liz said.
So a first degree burn is that sunburn. So you get the redness after being out in the sun, and it can even just be like a small steam burn. That second degree burn is going to be the blisters that are appearing. And then really anything above the second degree, it doesn't really matter, because we would want you to be seen no matter what. So you start to see those blisterings appear, you should get seen. And there'll be even sunburns that can be bad enough that could create your sun blisters, those types of things. So being just cognizant of that is important. We do measure it on a scale of first degree, second degree, third degree mostly. But anything above that first degree, we do recommend getting seen, because burns can also evolve. So you might have a small burn that you think that you might be able to just handle yourself at home, but couple hours later, it might start to feel so much worse. It might look worse. And that's, our bodies are not able to stop the burning process if we get burned. Running it under cold water does help, but it can evolve even if you are trying to prevent it. It could just happen without you even knowing it. So that's, if you start to feel like it's getting worse, really seeking out medical care for that is going to be important.
Oh, that's a very good point. Can you take us through a step of, okay, so say, I'm cooking and I spilled boiling hot soup on my arm. Can you talk me through the steps? Maybe I have a first or second degree, just so I'll know, because during COVID, we just try to manage things ourselves as much as possible without, causing too much of a ruckus, right? So can you just explain to us what we should do?
I mean, first thing, I would shut off the cooking. So if your burners are still on, shutting that off, because that's going to kind of help keep the environment around you safe. Second, if there's something spilled on the floor, you're going to want to put something over that so that you don't step back over it and slip. And then really cleaning it off, running it under water, just trying to get the area clean. If you notice that it's starting to just really be painful, if it's really starting to blister, I mean, I know it's tough with COVID, but we do recommend getting seen, just because it's also tough. We're not really we can't give out medical advice over the phone. There's telemedicine appointments available now. A lot of our primary care doctors have that. They have urgent cares that you can do telemedicine. So that could be helpful for you. But really, to keep yourself safe, and it's important to be seen by a provider.
Mm-hmm.
But
And
making sure the area is also clean and safe and that burner's turned off. You've moved the pan back off the stove onto the back burner if you're using the front burner. You've put something over the spill that you can clean up. Because that's going to also be important if people are coming to help you with it, that you don't want them to slip or hurt themselves as well.
You know what you said was the beginning, the first part when you said turn off what you're cooking, that makes so much sense because our instinct is we're in pain, we got to take care of the pain. We just got burned, we got to take care of the burn. For me, I wouldn't think about, turning off what I'm cooking, right? So I love how you said that because that could be another factor in the burn, which could cause fire.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What should we never, ever put on burns? Is there any type of medication, over-the-counter ointments? What should we never put on burns?
I think it really does. It's really up to the provider that you see. There's a lot of home remedies out there. I can't really speak to them. I recommend triple antibiotic ointment, that bacitracin. But like I said, like I've kind of just keep saying, seeing the provider, they're really going to be the ones to help you. Not so much Google searching stuff because a whole lot of things can show up and it might not be true and it could give you false information, but reaching out to your primary care doctor, we have portals now that we can email a primary care doctor. So even if you shot them a quick email like, hey, I burnt my hand, is there something that you recommend that I could put on this? And they might want to see you, they might want to do a virtual appointment, or they might refer you to a burn center or a burn clinic and we can see you and give you the appropriate care for that.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. And so we're down to a few more minutes left of our program. This time has flown. Are there any last minute tips, advices that you want for us to learn, or is there any key points that you want us to take away from this program? Because this has been very, very interesting and I really appreciate both of you for being here. Katherine, Liz, can you give us like one or two like really must do or not do? So that way we can make
Stand
sure.
by your pan.
What's that?
Stand by your pan.
Don't make me sing again now.
Stand by your pan.
And don't
Take
rush.
it away, Debbie.
Yes.
And don't rush cooking. Like this time, don't rush yourself.
Yeah.
Take your time when you're cooking. Take your time when you're turning the shower on and making sure that that hot water is not too hot. Just taking a step back.
Yeah, not rushing. Yes, definitely. Don't get distracted too, right? Yes.
Absolutely.
I learned that. Yes. Yeah. My family and I just bought a new stove. We like gas stoves. And what I learned also is you have to try to match the pot or the pan to the burner size.
Right.
Because if you have a pot that looks like fits nicely on the burner, but you have the largest burner, the flame will go up to the side of the pan and start burning the handles. I learned that also the hard way.
Yep. Me too.
So I'm just telling you what I've learned from experience as a cook at home. But truly, it's we have to be mindful of just the different sizes and different appliances that we're using, so that way we're using them to the safest ability, right? I want to thank you both for being here today to talk about burn prevention awareness, because it's so important for us to just really keep safe at home, keeping our home intact, keeping our body intact. So thank you so much, Katherine and Liz.
Of course.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, thank you. It was great. I want to invite everybody back again. I'll be back on March 25th in 2 weeks, where I will have Deborah Sylvester from Commonwealth Health Alliance, and she'll be talking to us about how we can live quality of life at home. So please join us then, March 25th. That's a Tuesday, 10 to 11. And until then, everybody enjoy your week. And again, thank you so much, Katherine and Liz. And thank you to Quincy Public Library for allowing me to do my injury prevention work out in the communities. So thank you again. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.